Welcome back to episode 9 of our Minijet CUB build series. Today we're going to be finishing up the interior of the boat by shaping our Coosa panels, installing the steering system, and dropping in the electronics that we worked on in the last episode. Now we're almost at the end of the build here, so by the end of today's video we should be fully mechanically complete with only the aesthetics left to do. With that, let's jump over to Ben and start shaping those panels. So this is the marine plywood alternative material that we use for the flooring, the decking in the boat, the engine cover, the bulkhead, everything like that. So Ben, do you want to just, I guess, take us through why we use Coosa and how we make it fit?
Yeah, so the Coosa is basically constructed of, it's like a polyurethane foam that has fiberglass layers on the outside. It's very strong and also very light because it's kind of foamy. It's also completely waterproof. We coat it, especially on all surfaces that are going to have HydroTurf or Ultradeck applied to it. So that's just what we use. You can also use any epoxy-based floor paint. Will work as well. It'll help seal it up and it'll allow the adhesive on the turf to stick. You can cut this stuff with any woodworking tools, jigsaw, circular saw, router, that sort of thing. On a cub, for example, there's 3 pieces of it that we use. The engine cover is just a big rectangle. It's pretty straightforward to cut that out. The floorboard, will make a template and cut that out. Anything that you're standing on, the floorboard and the engine cover is 3/4 inch, which is this thickness here. And then we also offered in a 1/2 inch thickness, which is what we use for any non-load bearing surface, like the bulkhead there. The other good properties of this stuff is it's light, but at the same time it has some bulk to it, so it absorbs sound nicely. It helps quiet the boat down.
One other thing is, unlike marine plywood, it won't rot, like you said. It's completely water resistant.
Yeah, it's inert. It can't be affected by water, so perfect application.
Yeah, I guess another thing about the Coosa is when you cut it, you got to be pretty careful. Wear all your PPE because it's fiberglass, so it's very itchy.
Yeah.
Not good to get in your lungs or really pleasant to get on your skin.
Yeah.
And to cut the Coosa, you mentioned that this back board is a rectangle, so it's pretty self-explanatory. You just measure, the hole that you're filling and cut that.
Yep.
This guy here, a little bit more complicated with the shape going right into the corners. We'll use a cardboard template to make that work. If it's a one-off, or we have our own templates here for this boat. Same thing with the floor as well. The Cub doesn't get a kick plate from factory, so this floor goes a little bit further forward than it would on another model. And then I guess one other thing worth mentioning is this floor only starts at the front of the seat box, which is installed here. On our 4-seat models where we have individual seat boxes, the floor will extend all the way back to the engine cover, and then the seat box will sit on top of that. Like we had before, we had the pads in the stringers that are welded in there and drilled and tapped for these fasteners. In terms of hardware, I guess, to fasten the floor down, what are we looking at?
Yeah, so there's a couple different options. We drilled and tapped these 1/4-20 fasteners into the stringers that run underneath. And then there's also 2 floor supports that run between the stringers right under here that pick up on these 2 bolts, and also add support when you're standing in the center there, because the outer stringers are the only ones that are up high. Yeah, it's basically just drill and tap into the 1/8 inch material. That's been enough. We've never had a bolt pull out of that thickness. And then, like I said with the washers before, you can see back here, we used these larger fender washers, so that when those bolts get tightened down, it's not just the nut pressing into the Coosa, because it will just bury it in there. That helps support it and keep it on the surface.
So yeah, spreading load is the name of the game when it comes to Coosa. Same thing why we use these nice decorative washers here instead of just like a button head or something like that. Helps distribute that.
So then for kind of hardware stuff that we use for the engine cover, these are our preferred hinges here that we sell on the website. This one has a nice gap in the middle, which allows it to span across the gap where the transom cap and your Coosa engine cover is going to be. And then we also include one of these. It's a laser cut washer almost that goes underneath the hinge, underneath the Coosa. Because it's foamy, you wouldn't want to put like a screw head directly on it. You want some kind of washer to help spread the load out. So we include that, which matches perfectly the pattern here on the hinge. So it'll go behind and sandwich the Coosa very securely.
And so all the hardware for the installation is included with the hinge.
Yeah,
when you buy it.
Yeah, all your nuts and bolts there. So on a Cub, there's 2 of these, and there's pre-cut holes in the back wing there that this will bolt right into, right there, like that. And then you'll have to drill your own holes in the Coosa board, obviously. And then to hold the lid shut, this is a Perco brand. This one's a locking latch. We also offer them in non-locking. So what this does, you'll cut a hole in your Coosa board, and then it's kind of like a bulkhead fitting. It will sandwich with a thread, sandwich this latch in, and then there's a cam arm that comes off this thread. So when you turn it, it will lock the Coosa lid down tight. There's 2 of those per boat also. And that's what's included in the Cub as a base. We also offer a hydraulic strut that will hold the engine cover open for you if you want that. It's an add-on, but with the Coosa being so light, you don't actually need very much super strong strut. And then we include the brackets and all the hardware in that kit if you want to add that to your Cub or any mini jet boat for that matter.
And that's the majority of kind of the interior actually done in one fairly easy step. As you can see, it all bolts or sits on the engine cover that we had built before, bolts to the back of this, and then bolts to the back of the seat box, and then just bolts right to the stringer. So the last real thing is coating the Coosa, drilling all the holes for the latches and hinges, and then of course getting our bench seat in, and we still got to finish up our dash panel there. So now it's time to tackle the steering system in the Cub. So every Minijet Cub gets our very own Minijet steering system. So this is composed of a bunch of different bent sheet metal plates, some bearings, and we'll just get Ben to walk us through what's all here and what you get in a kit if you order this for yourself.
So we've got, to start, is the steering shaft. It's kind of the main piece here. This has got the bolt pattern that fits all of our steering wheels nicely there. There's a pass-through, so you can run cables through that if you need to, for an electronic finger throttle or any buttons you want on the steering wheel. It comes with, this is the first bearing, which will actually go in the dashboard on the shaft right there. This is a plate that houses the second bearing and the cable pickup point right here. So that will go on the rear of the shaft underneath the dash. And then this is the cable actuator, so there's a cable screws in here, and this guy bolts onto the steering shaft and actuates like that. And then this is just a drop-down piece that you can have multiple different options to adjust the height and the angle of that rear bearing.
Awesome. So we've actually got this really cool mock-up jig that we used for our boat show. So you can get a bit of a better idea of how it actually all goes together. So this is basically exactly what you'd see underneath the dash of your boat if you were to install this system on it.
So there is instructions included as well that kind of gives you a breakdown of how it all goes together. But the gist of it is you've got this first bearing that goes on the dash right here. That's going to kind of set the position of the helm relative to the gunnel. So you probably want that in line with your seat normally. When you mount the second bearing in this plate assembly, when you mount that, you want some spread between the bearings so that they're not right up against each other. There would be a lot of leverage on the dash at that point. So the spread literally spreads the load back further down the hood of the boat. And
I guess the good thing with this system is you can set how far you want the steering wheel out, so how close you want it to the driver's seat. And based on that is basically where that back plate would end up. So you want them as far apart as possible, but still enough stick out on the front side to make it comfortable for yourself.
So these bearings are pillow block style. They can be misaligned, but visually, you want your steering shaft to be nice and square and straight. But you can set the angle of the steering, so kind of the tilt of it. You can set that by the height where you hook up onto this drop-down plate. And that plate can also be cut to clear the bearing in the back once you have determined that you're happy with the position of it. Yeah, so just you got to think about those 3 kind of angles, which will set where this ends up sitting. And then like Imran said, you can set the distance out from the dash to a point. All the hardware is stainless steel. Everything's corrosion resistant.
And yeah, so to actually, I guess, put it together, there's a couple ways that you can do it because it's pretty modular. So we have this plate that accommodates the bearing and basically this little arm right here. And that'll allow you to set end stops of the actual steering motion range there. So Ben's just spinning that and you can see one way or the other, it has those physical end stops, which is really nice. On the back side there's that other bearing. And so like I mentioned, you can flip it around both ways depending on how you want to set things up. To install it, once that plate's mounted up, you basically be feeding this shaft through that bearing. It's easier if you have all of your cables or whatever you want to pass through it in by that point. And then you'll be attaching this little piece before you get sandwiched through that bearing plate there. So this guy just has one fastener that goes through it that holds it all nice and square. and tight to this rod. And that is, again, what grips your steering cable there with that rod end. So pretty self-explanatory how it goes together. There is a lot of stuff that looks like other stuff, so it can, I guess, be a bit tricky to make sure you've got it all the right way.
And it's also worth noting, this is just a mock-up one. We've got a couple non-nylock nuts here. In the kit, it is all completely nylock, which is very critical because this is your steering system. If one of those nuts was to back off, you may lose all steering in a small creek where you need all the steering. So it's a very safe system.
So another kind of couple advantages and why we chose and manufactured this one instead of using like a JBS geared helm is there's a little bit less backlash. So there's a more direct drive just because we're going right to the cable. There's no gears that are going to get in the way. There's also the cost aspect, which this system is quite a bit cheaper than the JBS helm. As well, one of our probably favorite aspects is the ability for you to pass your cables and stuff all the way through the center of the steering helm here. So that plus the ability to stick the wheel out a little further from the dash without using like spacers or anything like that is a pretty nice touch.
Also, it's got, this is a 90-degree lock-to-lock situation where JBS, I believe the shortest they offer is 180 degrees. So this is just a lot shorter of a throw on your steering. It's very little input and the boat's going to move a lot. It's also adjustable. So Yamaha and Sea-Doo and Kawasaki, they have different geometry on their steering nozzles. So we've got 3 different holes depending which steering nozzle you have to get the right ratio and the right leverage to get full throw on your steering nozzle.
And so, yeah, I guess a couple tips when you're setting this up in your boat for yourself. Make sure that you've got your cable installed properly. Your jam nuts are all tightened against the back of the rod end. Making sure that when you apply this guy, there is some room for it to move. As you can see, that is normal to have some movement in the cable there. So that's why you use that nylon washer or bushing. And then also making sure that your cable is actually anchored correctly in your boat. And when you do that, there's an even spacing on this guy, the cable sheath, to make sure that you're not getting any contact here. You want to make sure that that's nice and smooth and running free of any friction so you have a nice long life and it is operating entirely properly. I guess one thing also worth mentioning is just be careful based on your nozzle. You may have to flip this little arm to the top versus the bottom. There is a lot of configuration possible, but the problem is sometimes you can accidentally set your steering in reverse. Just use a little bit of common sense and thought when you're putting this together and you should be okay. I guess besides that, is there anything else to kind of think about when we're putting this in?
I think that's pretty much it. Just make sure all your nuts and bolts are tight and yeah, no friction or bindings going on. As long as it feels smooth and you're hitting your stops properly, you shouldn't have any problems. We've put many hours on this system before. Cool.
I guess the next order of business is getting that whole system dropped into the boat. Pretty self-explanatory on the Cub. We've got pre-cut holes for almost everything, and then we'll actually weld this bracket up here to the underside of the front deck panel. And yeah, it goes together pretty easily.
Yeah, very straightforward system.
Sweet. Okay, we'll jump to that. All right, so we are back working on the Minijet CUB.
Yeah, so the boat is mechanically all done. Imran had modified the steering wheel harness to make those wires fit through the steering column, so it's nice and clean. Nothing, everything's attached to the steering wheel there, and then it plugs in behind underneath. And then also we've got the steering's all hooked up. So back here, we can see that our steering's hooked up at the back here. And it's hooked up and it's aligned, so when our nozzle's straight, the steering wheel is also straight. So that's just adjusted with those the rod end turnbuckle pieces at the end of the cable. And then also we've got all of our accessory harness completed as well. That's fully wired. All the Sea-Doo stuff is happy. Just low on fuel there. That's an easy fix. And then we've also got all of our, if you can hear that, our bilge pump, blower, and the nav lights. All that stuff's hooked up and working. And so we're on to the point of reassembly. So our 3 pieces of Coosa, we've applied epoxy product called bilge coat. So that seals up all the fiberglass pores and allows turf to stick to it. So yeah, the next big thing is turf. So for example, here Zach's building a template of our swim deck. So it's just a matter of laying down a piece of paper, and we like to use a sharpened pencil there, and then you can trace your edges on, and then and then trace any other features. Like here, we're gonna make a little pocket to go around the stomp grate hardware, so we can just trace that on with a pencil there. So yeah, similar to the UHMW, just make sure it's laid down flat and you've got all your edges where you want them to be. So that, and then reassembly, we're gonna go and put all the engine cover, we're gonna put the floor in, we're gonna get the seat bolted on, and then at that point, we're ready to do the vinyl wrap. So we'll show that when we get there as well. This is a Cub, so it's a pretty simple layout. We should be able to do it in a couple hours. And then it's going to be water tests, which is the best part.
Okay, so with that, we're almost at the end of this build. Next time we'll be adding the final aesthetic touches like installing the turf, applying the vinyl wrap, and after that, it'll be time to hit the water. Now, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like down below and let us know what you thought in the comments. Make sure you subscribe so you catch the final videos in this build series. With that, we'll see you in the next one.